I'm Martin Fryer, the Director of the British Council here in Korea. And thank you very much for coming this afternoon. And thank you to the Ministry of Education and the Korea Economic Daily for inviting us once again to participate in the Global HR Forum. United Kingdom's universities play a major role in providing higher education not just in the UK, but around the world, not least, of course, by the fact that we educate a large number of non-UK students. So we have a really, truly international profile. At the moment, it's estimated that 1 in 5 students in higher education in the United Kingdom is from overseas. And the over 150 education universities, higher education universities, and other higher education institutes not only benefit from having such a diverse student body, but also higher education in the United Kingdom is staffed by an increasingly international faculty. Around 16% of staff in UK universities are from outside of the UK. But internationalisation is not just about students and faculty. It's also about the relationships that universities have with the rest of the world. And this is extremely important for the health of our higher education system. It's important for its reputation and for its ability to stay relevant and in touch with global trends and issues. And this afternoon, I'm pleased that we're joined by 3 very distinguished representatives of our UK universities who are all highly experienced in the development of higher education outreach beyond the boundaries of the United Kingdom. So I'd like to introduce Professor Vincent Emery on the left, who is the Pro-Vice-Chancellor of the University of Surrey in the south of England, a biochemist, a virologist, and currently responsible for international relations for his university. And a warm welcome too to Professor Brink, who is the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Newcastle in the northeast of England, a mathematician who's held leadership posts in higher education in Australia and South Africa, and for the last 7 years has dedicated himself to maintaining and growing the University of Newcastle. And on my left, from the University of Aberdeen, in the northeast of Scotland, is the Vice Principal for Internationalisation of that university, Dr. Seth Kunin, a social anthropologist who has in recent years been in leadership roles in 2 major UK universities, the University of Durham and now Aberdeen. We've asked our speakers to say something about how they've addressed the opportunities and the challenges of leading their universities, particularly in the area of building partnerships outside the United Kingdom and competing for the most talented students and faculty both in the UK and internationally. And here, what we've put up in front of you is, of course, what we will hear this afternoon is that there are different models that have been developed to realize the true value of education, distinctiveness and relevance to the market, and many of those models include that international, transnational element. So I'd like to first begin by inviting Dr. Seth Kunin from the University of Aberdeen to speak. We're going to have 3 presentations. We would like to go through the 3. There'll be about 20 minutes each. Please store up questions for the end, and then we will open it to discussion for about 20 minutes, half an hour at the end of the session. So thank you very much again, and I'd like to invite Dr. Seth Kunin to join me here.
What I'm going to be talking today about is specifically issues connected with transnational education. Now, the University of Aberdeen is actually a fairly new player in relation to the formal side of transnational education, which is the idea of opening different kinds of campuses or different kinds of ways of teaching in international contexts. And so rather than say, these are the models that we have, what I'm going to try to do is discuss with you the process of thinking behind how we made decisions about the kinds of transnational projects we wanted to engage in, and how we're moving those projects forward. I should say that this conference is most apt for us because one of the major transnational projects that we're discussing at the moment is in Korea, and we would be the first UK institution to have a campus in Korea should this project come to fruition. So this is a very important issue for us, and the issues in relation to what we're doing in Korea are particularly indicative of the issues for UK institutions in relation to transnational education. I'm going to focus on a number of key issues. First, I'm going to focus on the question of how does one decide what kind of transnational education one wants to engage in? How does one make sure that that kind of transnational education fits in with two things? First of all, and most fundamentally, the mission of the university. A university shouldn't be just saying, oh, we can go do X, Y, or Z in some country because we can make money or we can raise profile. What it has to ask itself is, do the activities that we want to do in that particular country, is the nature of the process, is the nature of what goes on in that institution, what we fit in with the nature of our mission as a university? So that's the first key question. And the second key question is asking, what do we really have to offer? Many universities, like the University of Aberdeen, are, in a sense, full coverage universities. We teach everything from business to dentistry. But that ultimately, not all of those areas are what we really have to offer, that is what's distinctive about the University of Aberdeen. And not all of those areas would make an important contribution to the place in which we might want to develop our transnational projects. So it's a two-sided question, being aware of what we're really good at and asking the question, what does that have to offer to the community in which we hope to build an institution? And then the final bit is really the hard questions that one asks at the end of a process, is going through the very difficult due diligence questions about asking, okay, the mission is right, the offering is right, but is the market right? Is what we have to offer really something that that community will want? How does it impact on us in terms of our brand? All of these issues still have to be addressed, and those are the final stages in making a decision about transnational education. So there's going to be a number of slides that focus on broader issues about the University of Aberdeen, but the reason that I'm putting them up is not only to advertise the University of Aberdeen, of course that's always part of it, but to say these are the areas in which we can ask the right questions. These are the areas which allow us to focus our attention on what we want to do in the transnational projects that we're developing. So the first slide that I have up here has the mission, and I'm not going to read this all the way through, but there's a couple key aspects to it that are very important. First of all, it highlights the fact that the university is about doing something with and for society, addressing future challenges and addressing future needs, and making sure that the university is able to develop in the best possible ways both its research and teaching, but even more importantly, it's about people. It's about our students, it's about our staff, it's about the communities in which we work. And therefore, if we're going to look at any transnational project, we have to make sure that all of these different elements are what we're focusing on. So when we're looking at the particular project in Korea, it has a number of aspects that are particularly interesting for us that arise out of our mission. One of those aspects is that it does allow us to do teaching, to teach in the way that United Kingdom universities have developed that is an exceptional way of teaching and offers something different and distinctive. But even more importantly for us, it's also going to be very much about research. So these two key pillars of our university, research and teaching, are able to be maintained and are the key basis for the transnational project. It's not just to make money, It's actually to enhance knowledge, to make the world a better place, and to address challenges that our researchers can't address in the United Kingdom, but can address in Korea. So that is a key aspect of this project that comes directly from our mission. And a second aspect of that, the aspect of people, is also fundamental. One of the key themes that we're looking at as we're developing this project is asking the question, first of all, how can we best address the needs of Korean students and other international students who might come to this transnational campus? How can we offer them an education that fits what they need and fits what they will need and will equip them to best work in the future? And that's fundamental. In many universities in the past, the focus wasn't necessarily so much on the student and what the student needs and what student needs for employability and how a university can help prepare the students to particularly address those issues. Universities often focused on blue sky research. They focused on teaching that they were interested in rather than focusing on the needs of the students. Increasingly, over the last years or so, certainly since I've been involved in academia, we've become increasingly aware that it's not about us, it's about the students. And that has to be fundamental in developing a transnational project, particularly because it has to recognize that the students and the shape of the student cohorts will not be the same as in the United Kingdom, and therefore a transnational project can't just be transplanting what we do in Aberdeen. It has to be doing something that's new, distinctive, that arises from a conversation with what's going on with our Korean partners or other partners in transnational projects. Now, so the mission is the starting point, and certainly we get asked, and every university gets letters from different regions of the world saying, why don't you come in and start a project there? This is the key question that we ask. How does it fit our mission? And if it does, then we can go on. Now, the second key aspect that I mentioned was asking what you do that is distinctive. Now, what I've put up here is just a general slide that highlights, the normal features of a British university. And it highlights the fact that we have, a very big preponderance in Britain of undergraduates and a smaller preponderance of postgraduates. And so that raises interesting questions about the kinds of projects we might want to do. And it highlights the fact that already we have students from quite a few international contexts, from 120 different countries and the like. So that begins to say, we have a certain quality in teaching, that we have a certain history, but we need to focus a little more. And in that sense, we can begin to ask key questions about where has the excellence been historically. So if we just took the top marker on there, the 5 Nobel laureates associated with the university, several of them have had to do with food security and the Rowett Institute. In fact, one of those is a Peace Prize connected with food security. And we are deeply engaged in projects in Africa. Not opening a campus at the moment, but that could be an area that we focus on because that's been an area that has been very distinctive for Aberdeen. The other Nobel Prizes are in connection with medicine. And certainly medicine has been historically, going back to 1495 almost, one of the key features of what the university is about and one of its distinctive characteristics. On this slide, I could equally have mentioned energy, and I'm going to come to that in a second. But the key feature in looking at these different issues is to ask the question, what are the key areas that a university can be distinctive? And when we look at transnational projects, how can we take those distinctive aspects and take them to the community? So, like many universities, we have done over the last number of years a process of sitting back and asking hard questions. And that is, what are the 4 or 5 key areas that we do that make us different or distinctive, that we can give something back to the world, but we're also doing interesting things in terms of research. And medicine, which we call pathways to health, is one key area, and it is a very key bit of what the university is about. And it's pathways to health from maternal care, and we have a huge number of academics working in issues around birth and the like. all the way through to gerontology with academics working on key issues around Alzheimer's disease. So it's pathways to a better life. How can we transform the world through our medicine, through what we're doing? So that's one key theme, and we're certainly looking at some transnational projects in relation to medicine. A second key theme arises from Aberdeen's distinctive position in the United Kingdom. Aberdeen is the oil city for the United Kingdom. It is the main hub for the oil and petroleum industry out into the North Sea. And because of that, the university has put a lot of energy in its engineering department, in its geology department, in a whole range of other departments, and I'll come back to that in a second, because that is fundamental to what the city is about, but it's also a fundamental issue that the world has to face. Not only looking at petroleum, but looking at alternative forms of energy as well. So energy is the second theme that is distinctive. And to some degree, it has to be distinctive in Aberdeen, because we have links with industry, we have links with companies, I mean, one of which is Dana Petroleum, that's now owned by a Korean company and has key links back and forth with us and with Korea. So energy is our second theme. The third theme arises from our place in the United Kingdom, which is in the far north, and also from a long-term interest in Aberdeen in ideas about the north. And this is one that's important, because this one isn't so much about energy or about medicine. This is more about asking questions about how do we think about the world? What are the problems that communities, the indigenous communities in Alaska, the indigenous communities in Finland have? What are the issues that far northern communities have that are distinctive? And obviously, you know, the South, the global South has issues, but maybe the global North has interesting issues as well. But even more importantly, perhaps, the North is something about our imagination. In Europe in particular, the North plays a key role in many ideas, in many mythologies, and many folklores. And even today, people think about it. I mean, you just need to think about, you know, a rather trite example with St. Nicholas coming from the far north. Why is that? And it raises interesting questions about how we think about the North and its nature. So this theme allows us not only to be doing things that are scientific and practical, but also moving into some of these ideas that are more creative, including music, including art, and the like. And the final theme ties back to the Rowett Institute, which I've already mentioned, which is dealing with food security, which has been a major focus and is increasingly a major focus for the world today. So once you have your four themes, what you're distinctive, then in beginning to think about transnational education, one needs to address the question, where do we take that? How do we focus it? And the way that we've done it is by focusing particularly on energy for our key transnational project. And the project that we're doing here in Korea is directly focused on the issue of energy. And in order to focus our activities in Aberdeen, we've developed an Institute of Energy to bring all of the academics involved together. And what's distinctive about it is not only that it does cutting-edge research in connection with petroleum engineering and petroleum geology, but we also have distinctive work in petroleum law. One of the key themes of our law school has been looking at the issues of petroleum law, and we have scholars going all over the world consulting on issues of petroleum law. And obviously in the business school as well, issues of petroleum in relation to business, and making sure that people that go out from Aberdeen Business School are able to move directly into business contexts and the like. And this just gives you a sense of how we think about the Energy Institute, but to some degree, the Energy Institute is doing in Aberdeen what we want to do in our transnational developments. We want to be doing industry relevant research, and that's what Korea has to offer. It has to offer us facilities and resources that enable us to do industry relevant research that we couldn't do anywhere else, and links with key industries that allow us to do that in a better possible way, coming up with innovative solutions. But it's also about students. It's about producing world-class graduates and professional training products. So all of these are the key features of our Energy Institute, and when we started talking with our Korean partners, are fundamental to how we were thinking about what would be the key bits of our transnational offer. What do we offer that's really useful and important? And a key feature of that is also that it doesn't just look at the sciences. It's not just about engineering, but it's also about business and law, social science, and the like. And in our Energy Institute, we actually also have theologians who are thinking about the ethics of petroleum and the ethical issues raised by energy, because that's a fundamental question that one needs to address as well. And this just gives you a bit of the wide-ranging areas of expertise that are fundamental to our Energy Institute, and over time will feed into the transnational project that we're hopefully developing here in Korea. I'll skip because I want to make sure not to take too much time. Now, a key aspect of transnational, of what a university is about is partnerships, and increasingly it's about delivering overseas. Up to now, I've talked primarily about, in a sense, the one end of transnational education, which is setting up a campus. And that's what we're talking about with our partners in Korea. But transnational education is actually a much wider field, and any university thinking about transnational education has to address a wider range of issues than just saying, are we going to set up a campus? We have to look at international partnerships with other universities. British universities for the last 15, 20 years have been developing different kinds of agreements with universities, particularly in China, in Africa, and elsewhere. And very often, the focus of these was, how do we get students to come to the United Kingdom? Increasingly, we're recognizing that it's not only about getting students to the United Kingdom, it's not only about enhancing our international diversity, but it's also doing something for the universities with which we're partners. And increasingly, a key bit of transnational education has to be the mobility of staff. Staff being willing to go to China and teach for several weeks on a program, and welcoming Chinese partners to come and teach on our programs. I'm mentioning China because that's where we've mostly been developing this model of transnational education. But increasingly, our partners are asking the question, what are you giving to us? How are you enhancing what we're doing, not only taking our students? And that's an important question, because a university should constantly be asking, what are we doing for the communities of which we're part? And that includes our partner universities. And obviously, underlying any kind of transnational project and emerging from it have to be research networks and the like, enhancing connections between scholars, enhancing the kind of research. Because one of the issues that's a key to all internationalization is the realization that no one country has a monopoly to the best kinds of teaching or the best kinds of research. All of us do research and teaching in slightly different ways that arise from our cultures, from our histories. And the key aspect is to make sure that we utilize that and bring those things together to enhance the teaching that we're doing and enhance the research we're doing. And that only comes about by creating partnerships, by allowing staff mobility and encouraging student mobility. And finally, because I only really have a minute left, I think, one has to then say, okay, you've done all of that, you've had all the conversations, it seems like a great idea, but then you have to do the really hard work. You have to make sure that your market intelligence is right, that you really understand the markets that you're moving into, that you know what they need and what they want. You need to be making sure that the governance structures are right, because obviously the structures that you have for managing what you're doing in Aberdeen are going to be different if you have structures across the world. And the Vice-Chancellor of Newcastle could say much more about this than I, because he actually has experience of doing it rather than starting it. So I don't know if he'll address that. Obviously, there are significant legal and financial considerations, and in line with this conference, there are massive human resources considerations. What does it do to people's lives if you ask them to spend time in other countries? How does it affect and impact on their professional development? How do you make sure that it's recognized in promotion processes? How do you make sure that people understand that it's a key part of their role? And those are issues that we're beginning to grappling. And then finally, the key question that you always have to ask is, what are the expected outcomes? In some countries, some transnational projects, though very few actually do it successfully, are about making money. But almost none of them really do that, and they really can't be about that. They have to be about a way of bringing together educational cultures, bringing together research cultures, enhancing the capacity of both contexts by the partnership, and finding a way of reaching out to audiences that you couldn't reach if you just stayed at home. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kunin. I think that's a very good start with an example of what we hope will be happening here in Korea. And you can ask questions later, perhaps, about that. I'd like to move straight on, though, to Professor Chris Brink, Vice-Chancellor of Newcastle University.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for the honor of addressing you. I am going to talk about something we've done, which was to set up a medical campus in Malaysia. And I speak from the position of being Vice-Chancellor of Newcastle University. In Korea, I'd be called the President. In the UK, I'm called the Vice-Chancellor. And the two pictures on this slide are sort of emblematic of what I want to say. The picture on the right is the campus in Newcastle. That beautiful red brick building there, it's got those two arches, known as the arches, and it's been there for 100 years or so. And on the left is another picture of two arches, and that's our campus in Malaysia. And the two pictures show you that what we do in Newcastle, we try and do elsewhere in the world as well. So this is where we are. We are here in South Korea. That's the arrow on the right, this I'm sure you know. I come from the United Kingdom now. This is the arrow on the left, and the campus is in Malaysia, the arrow in the middle. So we are actually, I am at the moment closer to our campus in Malaysia than I am when I'm in my office in Newcastle. Just to flesh that out, you will see on the map here, most people know where London is, and this is where Newcastle is. It's the northernmost English city. If you go any further, you're in Scotland. If you go further up in Scotland, you're in Aberdeen. And if you go further south from London, you're in Surrey. If you now move in your mind from England to Malaysia, this is the tip of the Malaysian peninsula. Right there at the bottom is Singapore, and that's where our campus is. It's very close to Singapore. And that means when we set up that campus, all our staff actually fly in to Changi Airport in Singapore, not to Kuala Lumpur. And that's useful because we also have another campus, which is in Singapore. We have a medical campus in Malaysia and an engineering campus in Singapore, and the proximity of the two is very useful. I mentioned that, but I'm only going to talk about the medical campus in Malaysia, which is here. On this picture, there's a big development at the tip of the Malaysian peninsula carried out by a development company called Iskandar. And Iskandar has been doing there, they've been building in virtually a new city with hotels and a marina and businesses and industries and the state capital of the province. And inside there is a development called EduCity. And the idea of EduCity was, and is, that it is a single university where each of the academic divisions is provided by a different provider from abroad. So we do medicine with the medical faculty of EduCity. Southampton University is engineering. They do the engineering faculty in EduCity. Reading University does business, and so on and so forth. There's about 9 or so overseas providers. And inside EduCity, there again is the main building on our medical campus. This is the university. In Newcastle, whenever the sun shines, we quickly send out the photographers to take nice pictures. So the sky isn't always that blue, but it gives you an idea of the classic red brick 1900s, 1920s type buildings of a northern city English university. Here are some facts. It's the kind of thing you would expect, but I'd like to draw your attention to the first phrase, world-class civic university. And I'm going to explain what we mean by those two things, the juxtaposition of excellence with an integration and interaction with civil society. World-class civic university, if you would just make a mental note of that. We're a member of the Russell Group, which is a club of research active universities in England and in Scotland. And there's some statistics there about the size, about our international profile. Our budget is about getting up to £500 million a year, and about a quarter of that is research. So about a quarter of our income as a university come from the activities of our researchers. The students tend to be satisfied with what we do. More than 9 out of 10 of our students say they're very satisfied with what they get. And we're very satisfied because they get jobs. The last statistic there says 93.7% of the graduates, within 6 months, they're either studying further or they have a job. Remember the two arches? The kind of university that we are is illustrated by two questions. And I'd like to recommend those two questions to anybody who is associated with the university, whether it is as a student or whether it is as a support staff member or whether it is as an academic or whether it is as a manager. Our view is that you must know what you are good at. You must be able to say, my university is really good at medicine or engineering or mathematics or anthropology or whatever it is, and be able to substantiate that with the usual metrics and parameters and so on. But we, in addition, almost every university will be able to do that, but in addition we say we would like to be very clear about what we are good for. What role do we play in society? What contribution do we make? What contribution does our students make? What contributions do our staff make? And being able to respond to those two questions coherently, simultaneously being able to illustrate not only what you are good at, but what your university is good for, that in our view is the hallmark of a world-class civic university. That juxtaposition of excellence and societal purpose is emblematic of what we are. So, a brief little history lesson. 1834, some intrepid doctors in Newcastle decided to set up a medical school, a school of medicine and surgery. I think actually that's a little bit later once they had established themselves, when they started wearing the red gowns. It's a meeting of the medical faculty in the Victorian times. That's the medical school headquarters at the moment. Looks a bit like a flying saucer. It's full of experts on various things. But on that notion of what are you good for, we have a few areas that cut across the entire university that say what is the contribution we make to society. And one of those topics, there are only 3 of them, is the topic of aging. In this country in particular, in Korea, you have one of the most rapidly aging societies in the world. More and people live longer, they live healthy lives for longer, fewer and fewer young people, more and more people at senior years. And of course that is a triumph of science, that we're all very happy to be able to live longer, but with advanced age come the diseases associated with aging. Alzheimer's has been mentioned already by Professor Kunin, cancer, rheumatism, Parkinson's, dementia, all those things. So we are experts in those, and in the sociology of aging, and in the economics of aging, and in the technology of aging, and in the opportunities for business and industry that come with that change in demography. Now on to new-made Malaysia, onto the campus that we set up. Those 2 people at the bottom, the right-hand one isn't me. I'm the one on the left. The one on the right is the Duke of York. who very kindly came to open the campus for us because his daughter at the time, one of his two daughters, was a student of ours. And that was a significant moment when we actually opened the campus. So here's the story, a brief chronology. I will just summarize what you see on the slide. It took 10 years. From the day we first started thinking about it, through the time when the Malaysian government started making approaches to say they'd like to set up this Edu City, and they were looking around for partners, through the consultation period, through the time when we actually built a campus, which took 2 years or more, through the opening of that campus until in June this year, we graduated our first cohort of doctors, 10 years. And the story goes on. Next week, on the 11th, there will be a delegation from the Korean Prime Minister's office to visit Edu City, because of course, as you know, in Korea there are similar plans, and so they're going to visit NewMed to see what we have done. So you get the story ahead, a few days ahead of your Prime Minister's delegation. Now, why Malaysia? Why medicine? Why us? And I have to say, some of this is just serendipity. Some of this is just a happy coincidence of being the right institution in the right place at the right time. But if you left it at that, you wouldn't get very far. You really have to work at it. If that opportunity comes your way, you really have to work at it. Malaysia works for us. It's the kind of country with a diverse population, with a different kind of population where we think we can learn. It's the kind of place we think we can make a contribution. Our invitation came in line with the government thinking, the strategic plan of the government to increase their ratio of doctors to patients. They want more doctors. Preferably they want Malaysian-trained doctors, which we could provide, but they want the quality education as well. And so, hence the Edu City development, and we were the first. That is a strength and it is a weakness. We were the first. So as the anchor tenant, we got a good deal. The deal is summarized there at the bottom. It says build, lease, transfer. What that means is that the Malaysian government built the campus for us. We lease it from them for 30 years, and then it's ours. So in the end, after a 30-year, so this is long-term planning, after a 30-year operation, we will be the owners of that campus. How does it work? It is not a franchise. We don't do franchising. It's not a twinning program. We could do a twinning program, but this one wasn't it. It's a fully owned branch campus of the university. It will grow to about 1,000 students, which for a medical school means an intake of about 200 or so per year. At the moment, the intake is about 120 a year, and of course, we started small. We started with 20 students, then 40 students, then 60 students, and so on. At the moment, it's about 120 to 140, I think. It's a full-on medical degree. It does some biosciences as well, and it is an extension of what we do back in the UK. It's exactly the same, and that is crucial. Because one key fact in all of this was that if you get a medical degree from Newcastle University, you should, and in this case you will, be able to be accredited by the General Medical Council back in the UK. So a doctor trained in NewMed Malaysia with a degree from Newcastle has exactly the same rights and status in the UK as a doctor trained in the United Kingdom. This is why we do it, how it works. Strategically, we do it as a reputation-raising activity. We do it to help realize our vision. That notion of the world-class civic university, the interaction with civil society, that is as true in Malaysia as it is in Newcastle. And I mentioned the two arches. So the arches in Newcastle and the arches on the building in Malaysia, modeled to be exactly the same. And for that, we invented a word, and the word is Newcastle-ness. We want Newcastleness at NewMed Malaysia as much as back home in the UK. And for that, to make that work, you have to work at it. The experience of the students must be the same, the IT must be the same, the library must be the same, the modules must be the same, the exams must be the same. Students, like staff, students should be able to go back and forth, spend time in Newcastle, spend time in NewMed. We started with teaching, but we do not intend it to be only a teaching operation. We now have links, of course, to train medical doctors. They have to work in hospitals, they have to work with the health service, they have to work with health professionals, and that gives you inroads into research, which is the phase that we're in at the moment. In terms of finances, this is never meant to be a money spinner. I can tell you that it takes a while before you bottom out financially. Of course, you have to have a business plan, you have to have a break-even point, you have to plan for the full 30 years, if you can. But if we do break-even or better, that's fine, because our aim, the strategic aim, is to be a civic university elsewhere in the world, whether it is Malaysia or Singapore or the UK or anywhere else where we work. The strategic aim was not to make money. And it demonstrates our credentials on the global stage as a partner. So we would like to be a good partner. It's good for us if other people think we are people worth partnering with. It's not easy to set up a campus abroad. I've already said it takes 10 years. Here are some challenges. You can see one of the challenges before you. When we went, we were the anchor tenant. There was nothing. It was, if not jungle, it was plantations, really. There were no buildings, there were no roads, there was no infrastructure. It took a big amount of faith to say a city is going to grow here. So, a long-term project, you have to stick it out. You have to, all the red tape that you are used to at home, you're going to have double that much, because there will be red tape at the other end as well, and the regulatory environment, the bureaucracy, the red tape over here will not necessarily match up with the red tape over there. You have to put in resources, money, time, energy, people, commitment. If you're not willing to put in the resources, the energy, the time, the commitment, I would say don't do it. You have to find champions. There must be a leader. There must be people who want to do this. It's not something that can just be mandated from the top down. The faculty must want to do it. It must be part of the ethos of the university, because the staffing and the leadership are very important in making this work. You have to have people who can design and build a campus. You must have the architects, you must have the project managers, you must have the engineers, you must have the people who can design. If you don't have it, you must contract it. Then you must have people who know how to work with the contractors. And as you can see, it's a full-on, not just one building, it's a full-on campus. The student recruitment was difficult. Our plan was, and it over time developed that way, start small, 20, 40, 60, and so on. While we were building the campus, of course, we couldn't have students there, so the first cohort of 20 went to Newcastle for 2 years. The second cohort of 40 went to Newcastle for 1 year. The third cohort started here in Malaysia, and then the 2 other cohorts joined them. So on day 1, there were 20 plus 40 plus 60 students already there when the buildings were finished. And now, as I say, it's a full-on campus. You must, because you train students, you must assure the quality of the learning experience. So in part, that is a regulatory thing. There are quality assurance regimes in the UK, in Malaysia. You must follow that. But you must also, from the personal experience of the students, you must know what happens on the campus, what happens when they go home, where do they stay, How do they get to the campus? Where do they play sport? What kind of student societies are there? How would they join with whatever is happening back in Newcastle? And make that comparable. So our students' union back in Newcastle, our students' union was a very strong partner in all of this. They liaised with their counterpart students in Edu City. Sometimes the student leaders would fly out. They would join them for activities. They would Skype. That played a very big role. The General Medical Council, not a body to be trifled with, because, of course, being a doctor is a very responsible position. They have their own quality assurance body. They do the accreditation. They were with us every step of the way. The quality assurance people from the GMC were there at least once a year and sometimes twice a year, look at the curricula, look at the student experience, go with us to the hospitals, walk the walk. And finally, if you're going to be first at something, be prepared. It is a strength and it is a difficulty. If you're the first, you will be the first one to solve the problems. And all the others who come later, they will look at how you did it and gain a bit of advantage from there. What are the rewards? Well, here's a reward. This was a picture of our first graduation. That's our Chancellor sitting on the right, Sir Liam Donaldson, the previous Chief Medical Officer in the UK. The young man standing there at the lectern was the student orator. When we do a graduation, the person who delivers the graduation address is not me or the Chancellor, it's a student. All our graduations, the person who delivers the address is a student. So that's the student orator speaking at the graduation. It helps us realize our vision, which is what we want. It helps raise our profile. It does good. It makes a contribution to society elsewhere in the world. It makes a contribution to healthcare. It makes a contribution to education. And it's good for us. I'm and my university, we're very strong believers that diversity is an educational value. Diversity is good for us and is an educational institution, and this helps us to realize that view. And so, 10 years on, I can say it was all worth it. It was worth it for us. We believe it was worth it for Malaysia. We believe it was worth it for the staff. We believe it was worth it for the students. It was worth it for the patients. And from that experience, we now have much more that we can offer, both our students and to civil society, which is what we wanted to do. So I'll leave it there and say thank you very much with some very happy students about to graduate from NewMed Malaysia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Brink. I think there's another example of a very outward-looking approach from a British university. And please, if you have questions about some of the detail of what I think Professor Brink made sound a lot easier than perhaps it was to achieve that in 10 years, which may seem a long time, but actually to produce your first graduate in that period is quite an achievement. Please save up your question for the end. I'd now like to ask Professor Vincent Emery from the University of Surrey to join us on the podium.
Great, thank you very much, Martin. So that's a nice picture of Surrey. Beautiful in the sun as ever, not so nice in the rain, of course. So what I want to do for the next 20 minutes or so is give you some facts about the University of Surrey briefly, but then talk to you about the history and the performance of our University Global Partnership Network, how we're trying to build multi-level interactions, and how we're trying to leverage more from that partnership. And then in the second half of the talk, tell you about engaging with industrial partners in our new 5G Innovation Centre, highlighting for you the benefits to our partners, obviously to us, but also some of the challenges to the success of that project. As you'll have heard from my colleagues, Surrey again is a broadly based university with everything from engineering sciences through social science, bioscience. We've just launched a new vet school through to the performing arts. The university was actually granted its Royal Charter in a somewhat famous year. Who likes football in the audience? Any soccer fans? There's a few, yeah. So it was actually granted its Royal Charter in 1966, which some of you will know was the last time England won the World Cup. I don't think we're going to ever win it again, I'm afraid. But it was granted its Royal Charter in 1966, but it actually dates back to about 1891 as an advanced technical college. We rank very highly in the UK league tables and also as an international university. And again, rank highly for student satisfaction. We have around about 30,500 students. We also have a professional training year where students can spend time in industry as part of their degree programs. And we have over 2,300 partners, industrial partners across the world for that particular aspect of the undergraduate programs. Internationally, over 50% of our research outputs actually involve an international co-author. In fact, in the last 4 years, some 72 outputs have involved a Korean co-author. We've been awarded 3 Queen's Anniversary Prizes, 1 in water, 1 in space satellite technology, and 1 in ion beam technology and photonics. Turnover about £215 million, and we've been estimated to have a gross economic value to the local community of just over £1.4 billion. And I'll just say we've also got a campus in China, in Dalian, which has around about 1,000 students on board. So let me talk about the University Global Partnership Network. This was launched in 2001, actually a year before I actually joined Surrey, and comprises 3 partners: the University of Surrey, North Carolina State University, and the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. So it's very much a unique North-North and a North-South partnership. And again, these things don't develop by chance. This interaction really developed from a series of interactions and bilateral agreements between those 3 universities, dates stretching back right to the sort of mid-1990s, but then that matured through the 2000s and led to the idea that maybe we could work more closely together and reap some of the benefits. The mission and the vision is shown there. I'm not going to read it out, but just to sort of emphasize to you, it's about coming together, bringing our strengths together and complementary strengths in order to address some of the big challenges that we face in the world today. So how do we realize that vision? Certainly there's a combined approach, very much a top-down approach. That's my leadership role, where I'm trying to seek opportunities within the partnerships and demonstrate to my academic colleagues that these opportunities exist, trying to disseminate that through the faculty structures right down to the ground level. But equally, we're looking at bottom-up interactions. There's a lot of my colleagues who already have interactions within these universities, and they're bringing stuff to me and saying, can we do more here? Is there pump prime funding available, etc.? Where's the funding coming from to allow us to take this to the new level? So very much it's a top-down, bottom-up approach, which I think often is the way these things really work and are successful. The UGPN is actually led by an executive group comprising the 3 international vice presidents, and currently I'm the actual chair of that executive group. And we have another representative from our academic community who sits on that particular executive group. We have met every 3 months virtually by video call. Actually, we've increased that to every 6 weeks now because we feel that the appetite is there to really, again, move this to a new level. And so that needs fairly aggressive interaction in order to make sure that we're achieving the KPIs that we've set, we're assessing progress. And obviously, we also have the opportunity to think about putting financial input here to really stimulate interest amongst our community. And one of the things that was set up when it was instigated was that each university would put in $60,000 US to create a corpus fund on a yearly basis of $180,000 that individual academics could pitch for as either bilateral or trilateral projects. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. But in my view, that's been very much critical to really engaging the academic researchers in this particular process. So it's an annual call. As I said, each partner commits $60,000 US, producing a pot of 180K. And the bilateral awards are worth $20,000 US. The trilateral awards are worth $30,000 US. It's a competitive process. We usually get something like 18 to 24 applications from different consortia within the bilaterals or trilaterals. And we look at them on academic merit. We look for high-quality research. We look for research that will have impact. We look at the potential of those research projects to leverage further funds so that they can then sustain themselves in the short to medium term. And also we look very much at PhD research and mobility. because that's really important into thinking about linkage between the ground level researchers and then again using that to then bring new research partners in the context of academics into the system. I think we are getting to a stage where we have broader and deeper engagements in the context of academic outputs. Since 2011, we've had 23 papers published directly related to UGPN activities, and 10 of those have been published in this year already. That's with 2 rounds of funding, I might add, so I think we're doing pretty well in the context of pump priming and getting real deliverables from that. Most of those journal publications are in high impact factor journals, and researchers from all 4 of my faculties at Surrey are actually involved in those publication outputs, and that's really quite important. You're trying to engage the whole community in these interactions rather than just being, say, engineering, although there is clear engineering strengths in all 3 universities. Follow-on funding applied for exceeds investment by about 23 to 1. Unfortunately, not all of those are successful, but funding applications currently worth just over £1 million are pending. So I see the future fairly positively in the context of securing future funding to support those projects further. I think what's also important is how you can use these things strategically. The University of Surrey and Strathclyde University in Scotland will assume control of our National Physical Laboratory, our National Measurement Office in early 2015. And obviously building on links from Brazil and also from the US to their national measurement offices gives us extra leverage, and we're currently looking at that as a serious option to really reap the benefits of becoming a partner with the National Physical Laboratory. I did a quick estimate before I came over here about the engagement across all 3 partners, and I reckon that there's probably around about 120, I think, researchers and administrative staff who are actually interacting in a serious way across those 3 partners. So quite a substantial body of researchers that are really interacting and delivering against our objectives. How can we facilitate some of those activities? Well, we can use our Santander Universities Award, which we have quite a reasonable amount of money from Santander to facilitate researcher mobility, staff mobility, and strategic initiatives, and we do really use those quite strategically in the context of supporting UGPN activities. We also signed an agreement with the Sao Paulo Research Foundation, FAPESP, in 2011, which again allows us access to Brazilian funding streams. And I guess one of the added values here also is that when the president of Brazil, Dilma, launched her Science Without Borders scheme, we already had quite a high presence in Brazil, and we've done actually very well out of recruiting students from Brazil through their Science Without Borders scheme. And I think to date we've had about 180 students on the Surrey campus. So there's lots of added value you can have by having these footprints internationally. Where next for the UGPN? I think it's mature enough to bring in new partners. It's something that we've discussed before, and I think we haven't quite got to that level of maturity in the past. I think now we're sort of 3 years old. I think we're sort of getting there, and we're currently scoping out potential partners based on existing bilateral contacts within the UGPN members. We're very much looking at their strategic fit with the existing 3 partners. I think the mutual benefit is essential for those things to work successfully, and obviously to persuade colleagues in other universities. This is a good network to join. We're initially looking at universities based in Europe, a couple of universities in Australia, and 1 potential university in Africa. So let's move on to the industrial side of interactions and partnerships. This is our 5G Innovation Centre. And I probably don't need to tell the Koreans that the future is all about connectivity, communications and control, really important towards our digital economy and the impact that will have on our society. And obviously the impact that will have on modernising ageing industries such as transportation, energy, manufacturing, health, etc., etc. And ultimately producing smart homes, smart cities, and I guess smart countries, both in the context of new builds in homes and cities, but also retrofitting existing infrastructures. And clearly that whole infrastructure, linking energy through water, through food, through transportation, public health in particular, requires telecommunications and ICT, and clearly that's going to be a key thing in the future, is how you connect all of those things together to produce your smart city and smart country. Industrialisation of the internet is quite remarkable how that has evolved over the last few years. There's some data here on this graph with, say, around about 300 million connected devices in the early 2000s, up to 2010, where there's estimated to be something like 14 billion connected devices. And that's obviously connecting lots of things, cars, buildings, hospitals, schools, governments, often within themselves and then maybe to some national networks. But still, if you look at it across the globe, roughly 99% on actually things are not actually connected. So the challenge there is to connect these things much more globally. And that brings me on to the sort of state of play in the context of the mobile communications technology, where we started off with 1G many years ago. Some people might remember that. Then we moved into the 2G era, and then we went into the 3G era. And obviously more recently we've gone into the 4G era in the context of the fourth generation mobile communications technology, where we've set industrial standards that allow manufacturers to meet those standards and for communication networks to again reach the standards that we expect as users. And of course we're now looking forward to the fifth generation global standard for about 2020, and that's very much the area that my engineering colleagues are involved in this 5G Innovation Centre. That's a picture of the building that will be complete in early 2015. It's a fairly significant investment, both from the Higher Education Funding Council of England, the university, but also, as you'll see at the bottom of that slide, a range of industrial partners. And they've been very much key to allowing us to create this, but also hopefully to deliver it. You'll see some well-known names there, Huawei, but also Samsung, of course, one of our key partners from Korea. But it really is bringing all those partners together, because effectively you're developing something brand new. You're developing a fifth generation mobile technology, and you're trying to generate the standards that you will expect to see in the industry from 2020 onwards. So it's really important that all of those partners are actually on board. So the mission for the 5G Innovation Centre is to become a world-leading centre for multidisciplinary communications research, to really become the model for collaborations within academic institutions in the UK and outside of the UK, with industry in the broadest sense of the word, and obviously within the community, both nationally and internationally. And we want to deliver these innovative communication solutions to create both economic, but also, and maybe alluding to some of my colleagues' statements, the social value as well, and obviously to influence future standards and regulation. And it's very much creating that ecosystem with all of those different key stakeholders that should allow us to realise that vision. So what's the benefits for the members, the industrial members in this 5G Innovation Centre? Well, clearly they have access to world-class academics and researchers. They can access state-of-the-art technology and evaluate that technology in a facility that's very much dedicated to 5G technology. The way the thing is structured, they have access, if they're a platinum or gold member, and that depends on how much money they want to invest in the whole programme, to royalty-free and non-exclusive IPR. It's been actually quite a challenge to get all these guys together in the same room, because obviously quite a lot of them are competing with each other. And so consequently trying to create an environment where they're happy to sit around a table together to discuss their own interesting IP in the context of a free discussion, for us to discuss our IP with them, and for them to then think about ways that they can exploit new IP coming out of the 5G Innovation Centre requires some quite subtle negotiation and also some rather interesting legal toing and froing. But we've actually got there, and I think we've got a very good template that seems to be working rather well in the context of getting their confidence in us and us having confidence in their partnerships as well. Interestingly, already we've got 2 or 3 pieces of IP that's come out of the centre over the last 6 months, which I think will again prove to be very exploitable and very interesting. Clearly, from the members' perspective, the ability to effectively and timely influence the 5G technology standardisation is quite important, and that gives them, if you like, a test bed for some of these technologies to decide what the standards should be, what works and what doesn't work, and they can complete that in a complete ecosystem built around that whole issue of 5G technology and standardisation. And obviously, they will also be able to participate in academic publications that are coming out of that, those studies. And again, just on the right of that slide is, if you like, the 5G Innovation Centre ecosystem, where you're bringing together service providers, application providers, the regulatory side of life, the test equipment vendors, and obviously the manufacturers themselves. What's the benefits to us as a university? Well, clearly we can take a leadership role in basically developing this multidisciplinary communications research centre. We can establish high quality outputs on the theory and practical performances of 5G advanced technologies. We can use that in the context of teaching, both undergraduates and postgraduates and research, but also looking at upskilling engineers in industry and so on. We can clearly use that as a collaboration vehicle, and we can generate IPR from it ourselves and protect that IPR and exploit it as appropriate. And again, that all contributes to economic growth for us and for the community around us. The 5G approach has very much been around always sufficient rate to give the user the perception of infinite capacity. There's clearly no such thing as infinite capacity, but there are two complementary solutions that my engineering colleagues are working on, big data utilization with intelligent control, but also this concept of infinite capacity through space, time and frequency, where the user, if you like, sees the demand responding, or sorry, sees the system responding to their demand, and therefore the system has a capacity to respond to increased demand from the user. One of the ways we can achieve that is through small cell technology, shown on the left here. These very small transmitter units that can create small local networks, then linked to larger networks, and that's probably going to be a key factor in enabling the 5G rollout. These things at the moment you can strap onto lampposts and the like, but ultimately you can actually build them into those structures as well to give you that sort of flexibility as you produce new materials and new structures for your environment. And we're just in the process of setting up a test bed. This has moved a bit quicker than we thought, partly due to Huawei, who has provided us some fairly significant investment and kit to produce a test bed around the university campus. You can see some of the other key players here that are involved at this stage of the game. Samsung will be involved in the later stages, but where we're looking at microwave radio links and rapid fiber links to create a local 5G network that we can then start using to test out what works, what doesn't work, what does infinite capacity really mean. And I think the important thing here is to realize that you know, this is about engineering solutions at the moment, but the wealth of information and the technology that's generated from this has impact across the whole spectrum. So we're particularly interested in looking at health applications, looking at e-health. We're particularly looking at smart homes, the way it can feed into smart cities, and obviously, as I heard today, your road system is highly modulated by automation and computer control. And again, I think that allows us to step to a new level in the context of controlling our infrastructure through this sorts of technology. So I'll stop there and say, Kamsahamnida. Thank you. That wasn't very good. Maybe I should try that. Kamsahamnida. Is that better? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Emery. I think we've had a glimpse there of some very high-tech advances in the south of England, but also thank you for sharing some of your experience in global partnerships, which of course is a very common theme between us all. And we've got 21 minutes, I see, and what I want to do is kick off with a slightly provocative question for my colleagues. I think you all mentioned your university rankings, and national and international rankings have, of course, become increasingly important and are used a lot to market universities. I'd like to ask how you feel about this international fashion, this trend to compete for ranking, sometimes perhaps over more you know, in competition with the more subtle ways of describing the strengths of your higher education universities. So it's really a question about, are rankings a necessary evil, a good thing, or there's something that you would prefer really not to live with? I mean, who would like to start? Let me start with Professor Kunin, and we'll hear your view.
I think there's a number of ways of thinking about this. I mean, I think the first one is that they exist and they're not likely to vanish. So whether we like them or not, we have to take them seriously. And we know that students and universities that we visit or that speak to us take them seriously, therefore we need to be aware of them. That being said, we also need to be aware that they are actually, particularly the international rankings, not necessarily perfect measures of what a university does well or doesn't do well. The international rankings are very significantly based on people's perception, other academics' perception of universities, and that means that certain things can skew where a university is placed or not. So one has to take it with a grain of salt and be aware that they are not as good measures as they might be. That being said, I think that you can use rankings, league tables, whether home league tables or international league tables, as a proxy for indicating your success at getting your message out. So that if you can actually communicate the areas that you're excellent in, if you actually can show what you're doing and how you're engaging with international partners, then that will be reflected in the rankings. And so even though it doesn't necessarily say that much about the real quality of your research in sciences, that would be much better looked at in other types of measures. In arts and humanities, again, probably other measures are better than the league tables, but it does give an indication of how people perceive you, and therefore you can then work with that. I think the important thing is that university managements shouldn't use them too much to shape what they do. So they shouldn't change the kinds of teaching they do, shouldn't change the kinds of research they do if it's just based on rankings. You have to use other more subtle measures to make sure that you make the right kinds of decisions. But the rankings are there, and we need to be aware of them and to use them.
Thank you. Professor Brink.
Yes, I agree with all of that. I would just add a few things. The one is you must be aware of what rankings measure, and that they measure different things, and that's why they give different results. You must also be aware of what they do not measure. And when I spoke about the world-class civic university, the notion of interaction with civil society, rankings do the world-class bit. They can count the publications and the citations and compute that by some algorithm into a ranking. But they don't actually measure your value to society. And if that is, as it is in our case, part of what you want to do, you want to be clear for yourself, for others, what is the contribution that you make in society, locally, in your own city, in your own country, internationally to society. Those are more intangible. In my view, they're more valuable in the long run, but they're less easy to measure, and so the rankings won't measure that.
Thank you. Professor Emery.
Yes, I can add a couple of extra things maybe there, and that's a very good point actually about contribution to the society. I think you have to also bear in mind, as my colleague mentioned, that the issue that academic reputation is based about a survey to a number of people across the whole world, and it's whether they know you and whether they think you're a highly ranked institution. That's very idiosyncratic. The other thing is that if you have a medical school, that makes a positive influence in your positioning in those tables. The top 200 universities, there's very few universities in the top 200 that do not have a medical school. And just as a personal experience, because I've actually been charged at Surrey with improving our league table position on the international front, if I tell you that our latest QS position is 314, it will get better. But if I tell you that in 2007 it was 160, 160, so we've actually gone backwards, I would have to say that if I compare the University of Surrey in 2007 to where it is in 2014 is in a massively different place. both in the context of investment for infrastructure, the student experience, the employability. It's transformative. So that's where, you know, your investments and your contributions, if you like, to the student experience really don't reflect themselves in the international league table. So I think for any prospective students out there, you know, treat these things with a bit of caution, look at it in the context of subject-specific levels, and complement it with national league tables as well, because you'll get much more granularity about the student experience from those national league tables, which really isn't captured in the international ones.
Thank you very much, Professor Emery. We've got around 15 minutes for questions, and thank you to those members of the audience who've provided a few here, but we've got a roving microphone. So I will start, though, with a question from somebody in the audience. This is, in fact, addressed to you, Professor Kunin. It's from a student, Osungan, who asks, with a new campus project, what are the criteria you use for the choice of country where you will locate a campus or courses in your case?
To some degree, that is a bit idiosyncratic in as much as it depends on which countries are ambitious enough and engaged in trying to enhance their transnational provision. So to some degree, part of the reason that we chose to engage with Korea is that our Korean partners chose to engage with us. So one shouldn't put that aside. But that being said, we also asked certain questions. One was looking at the market. Is it a market where there's already a very significant number of other universities that have come in and therefore will be, in a sense, competing with quite a few other international universities from the start? And clearly, particularly when you're new at developing a transnational campus, it's probably better to try to find a market that's less well developed than one that's very developed. And Korea is less developed in terms of the numbers of international partners of this kind as compared, let's say, to some of the other countries that have been mentioned. So that was a second aspect. But the third aspect, and the one that was most fundamental to us, comes back to what I was saying about our mission. When the Korean partners came to us, we could have just said, okay, we want to, Korea is going to need to have more highly skilled engineers in connection with petroleum, and the statistics bear that out. People doing MSCs and the like in relation to energy. Therefore, this is a good market because we can teach students. And no doubt that will play a role. We have to make sure that we can get enough students to make this a successful project. But what was even more important to us is that the Korean government was focusing investment, concentrating where the industries were in terms of shipbuilding, in terms of energy-related research in the area that we were going to be, where we're discussing building this campus. And for us, that was the fundamental point that said, this is the right place to do it. Here we can do really interesting research that we can't do in Scotland. That's the key thing. And so all of these things together led us to make this decision.
Thank you. This is a question to Professor Brink. Quite a simple one, actually, which is, what did Newcastle University in Malaysia give to the Malaysian people, or what will it give? So what is that core benefit from that project?
Yes, that's easy enough to answer, because of course we thought about that a lot, as did our partners in Malaysia. So two things I would say in response. One is there is to the country a benefit if you have people trained abroad. This is well recognized. But in this case, we were able to provide a British medical education without all the students having to go to all the expense of going off to the UK. So you could get the value for the country and for the individual of a British medical education right there in Malaysia, which is a significant saving, and yet you get the same product. The other advantage I would point out is that it's a two-way advantage for us and for them. It's the way in which we learn from their healthcare system and it's the way in which their healthcare system benefits from the training that our scientists and our clinicians have.
Thank you. This is a question that was addressed to all speakers, but perhaps, Professor Emery, you can take this one. The programs that will obviously assure some intellectual benefit, how do you transform those into practical benefit? And here is a question I think that a lot of young people feel that is important, that will give that practical benefit for a more peaceful world for the new generation.
This was quite a complicated question, isn't it? Yes, that will stimulate my brain to work. So I think, yeah, I think a lot of the way universities teach, there's a perception that we still live in ivory towers, which we don't. We are much more attuned to the needs of society and of industry. So I think a lot of the ways we develop programs, be they in our own universities or transnationally, are around empowering individuals, if you like, with that mindset, and you know, not necessarily just thinking about it as an intellectual activity. So I think, you know, I think we are doing a pretty good job at that, and I think the UK maybe is leading the world in that area, actually.
Would either Professor Brink or Professor Kunin like to respond to that? Because I think we do live in a world with a lot of conflict still, and the prospect of more conflict is often discussed, particularly in the media. So what is the university's role in turning a lot of these very exciting intellectual initiatives into very practical benefit that will lead to a more peaceful world?
I think there's something very good, very pleasant happening in higher education, perhaps worldwide, and that is that students more and more accept not only that higher education, going to university, is a private benefit, a benefit for them, access to a good career. More and more the students are saying it must also be a public good. There must also be a benefit to society. And more students are demanding that in their curricula, in their teaching, in their projects, in their internships, in the way that they volunteer in society, they want to feel that they're part of a coherent movement for the university to be a role player for the good in society. And that plays out in many ways. It could play out, for example, in sustainability. So another one of our three themes, I mentioned aging. The other one I can mention would be sustainability. More and more the engineers, the scientists are saying, if I study to be a civil engineer, will you, as part of the curriculum, as part of my education, will you show me what I can do to reverse climate change or to re-engineer the city or to work for urban sustainability? And I think, as often happens, it's not only the lead given by the academics and the staff, it's actually the lead given by the students.
Professor Kunin.
And I mean, just to add to that, I mean, in Aberdeen, our students are very, very engaged in wanting to get more out of their education, and the university is increasingly responding to that. I think I mentioned early on in my remarks that universities have changed to be, you know, from being focused to some degree on the academics to being focused on the students. And in responding to our students, we're responding to their needs to be productive members of society. We're responding to their needs to be engaged members of society. And so we have a number of different projects that develop particularly down this kind of route. Within our medical school, we have a group that's called Impact. And the word impact is chosen because what they're all about is impacting on society, transforming, in their case, maternal health, primarily in Africa, but also in Bangladesh, and really addressing the real issues of infant mortality, maternal mortality, and all of the issues connected with that. So the medical school sees as its goal in society not just training doctors, but really impacting the world. And I could pick out other aspects of the medical school, a recent development in terms of a joint center in South Africa that's focusing on microbial health It's actually microbes and things connected with fungi that cause the majority of diseases and deaths in Africa. And this particular group is engaged particularly in working with African colleagues to address those kinds of issues. Equally, in the university as a whole, we've added in what we call 6th century courses that students take, which have the clear focus of enabling them to address key issues as global citizens, whether it's about sustainability, whether it's about working with development, and a very significant number of our students go on and work in NGOs, and that's their goal, not to go and work in the city, not to become bankers, as many students when I was a student wanted to do. Now they're more interested in impacting the world, and I think that that's a really important change.
Professor Emery.
Yeah, just to complement that and pick up on the global citizenship agenda. I mean, I think it again complements some of the plenaries this morning where we're talking about trust and basically cultural awareness. We all have very international communities at our universities, as do many other UK universities, and that gives a real opportunity for students to start, understanding each other's cultures, understanding the tensions that exist in different contexts of the world. I mean, it was great for me to see at our recent student induction, a range of Indian students talking to a range of Pakistani students in a very open, friendly fashion. And I think that can only be a positive thing in the context of generating a cultural awareness and leading to peace on the earth.
Thank you. Now, do we have a question from the floor? Put up your hand. We've got a question here. This young gentleman in the blue shirt. If you could give your name and where you're from.
Hello, I'm Lee Jae Kun from Younghoon International Middle School, and I have a question to Chris Brink from Newcastle University, but actually for a question for everyone. Well, the 3 speakers are at the position of university, but I'm at the position of students. And Mr. Brink said that Newcastle University always think about what we are good at. But for me and for 3 university students, what is the better choice? What we are good at or what we want to do? What choice do university teach to students?
Professor Brink.
If I understand the question correctly, it's what choice does the university give to the students in that respect? Well, it took us, it's easy enough to find out what you are good at, because you can do the analysis, your university would have the data, and so you can say, we're really good at medicine, we're really good at engineering, we're really good in the business school, whatever the case may be. What is much more difficult is to come to a consensus on what you are there for, what the social value of your university is. So it took us about 2 years or more. We had endless discussions on campus. We had town hall meetings, we had seminars, we had think tanks, and the students participated in all of that. So the community of the university is as much the community of the students as it is the community of the academics. And in the end, having made this not a top-down decision, but a collective decision, in the end, we feel the students own that as much as the professors do. And that is why they are participants still. Now, when we launch projects, when we have demonstrator projects, it's the students often who lead the way. Sustainability would be an excellent example. The students at the moment are very exercised about fossil fuels, global warming, that kind of thing. And then you engage in a debate about to what extent does the university make a contribution to a better world, and to what extent does it participate in the things that the students are concerned about. So it's not a matter of telling the students this is the structure, this is the strategy of the university. It is a matter of engaging them in building that up.
Professor Emery, then Professor Kunin.
I'm just wondering whether the student was actually asking about you as a student. Should you do what you're good at or what you want to do? Was that, yeah? So I guess my advice there would be do what you want to do, yeah? Because that's where your passion is. And I'm minded of a quote by Mahatma Gandhi is, be the change that you want to see in the world. Because you have that power to do that change. That means you do what you want to do.
rather than just because you're good at maths, doing maths. Now, clearly you need to do, you need to choose a subject area where you will have the relevant qualifications to gain access to that. But, don't just do something because you think, I'm really good at that subject because I score really well in exams. Think about it in a more holistic way.
Professor Kunin.
Just in a slightly different way, one of the features of British education is a concept which you could call research-led education. And although that can mean many different things, for me it means only one thing. It means putting the student in the center, allowing the student to become an independent thinker and an independent researcher. And if the student does that, if any module you take allows you to become an independent creative thinker, then you're going to do both what you're good at and what you're good for. So the two things will go together if you get that, if the university provides you that kind of independence. And that's what it's really all about.
Thank you. I think that's a great way to end. I'd like to thank all three of our speakers for their presentations and for their visit. It's been a great pleasure to be with you and to continue to be with you. And I'd like to thank the audience for being here. And let's have a round of applause for all three of them. Thank you.